Hi, this is Curt and welcome to another edition of Fire Law Roundup.
But that said, what a great transition back to you for Maui, because there, the allegation of what started the fire and their prevention, that's more interesting to me. I don't think there's liability, but very interesting. So let's go through that.
Yeah, this is an interesting case. And for those of you who have been living in a cave for the last 10 days or so, there was a major wildland fire in Maui that I'm not sure what the death total is, but last I heard it was like 120, but something like 1,000 people missing. And you know, that's in 2,700 buildings. I don't know if it's 270. Somebody else said it was 270, but the article I saw said 2,700 buildings, over 2,000 acres, and over $5 billion in damages. Just horrendously and biblical. You know,
you can't replace most of this stuff. Thank God the banyan tree survived. I don't know if you've been to Maui. I love Maui. But thank God the one thing, the banyan tree, mostly survived. But it is horrible, but I think this lawsuit is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. And for those of you who haven't looked at the lawsuit, you may want to take a look. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna put it up on the screen actually, because I think it's an interesting. It's done well, okay, and I'm really surprised that it was done this way so quickly. Okay, that we're not dealing with a situation where they had months to prepare this. This was prepared days, but it was a couple that filed suit. And unlike a lot of the lawsuits that we see that are very dry and is just words, the complaint, you see, it has a lot of the pictures. Okay, so you can actually see the difference in the city. And Brad, what's the proper pronunciation of that city?
Lahaina.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've heard it butchered.
No, it's Lahaina. They call it Front Street.
Okay.
It's Front Street on Lahaina, but it's where all the restaurants, the art galleries, the shops, the fishing village, where it all is. So
just really tragic. And so you see the maps and stuff. So, this might be the kind of, certainly for the folks who may be studying this for various reasons, tactical, strategic, or however you may be using it. It's a lot of good information that's in the lawsuit. Couple of sort of things sort of converge. Number one, a drought. Number two, you had hurricane force winds. And the hurricane wasn't there. If the hurricane was closer, you would have had water and it would have been a non-issue, but you had the wind, and they had a fire, and a brush fire, or a couple of brush fires, and 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds were pushing the fire directly toward the community.
You skipped a quick point. The point they say is you left your electrical lines powered, and that's what sparked the fire.
Right.
That you should have known to de-electrify everything.
Right.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah. We'll get to that. But the extent of the damage, okay, you can see sort of where, I believe the fire originated. It's original 3-acre fire. And with the wind blowing and blowing it right toward the city. And I watched a video clip last night of the fire chief explaining the challenges that they faced. And there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. I think that there's a suggestion that it was the same fire that they had at 6:30 in the morning that sort of reignited or heated up again later in the day. There's also a question about whether or not it was a separate fire nearby, and that may have been ignited. And they think the original fire was ignited by down power lines, but the second fire also possibly by down power lines. And why that's important is the key fire here was really at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but they had an earlier one which they believe was power line related, that was around 7 o'clock, 6:57, something like that in the morning, that they quickly contained. So as Brad suggested, there's a question about whether or not the electric company failed. And there's a number of failures, and the suit here was by a couple against several utility companies that all apparently are somehow involved in the providing of electricity to Maui. But there's initially a question about whether or not their equipment is outdated. So you've got a sort of a negligence allegation there that the equipment is outdated. Then you've also got an allegation that in anticipation of the problem, in anticipation of the drought as well as the hurricane force winds, that the electric company should have shut the power down before 6 o'clock in the morning. So before that first fire. But then there's another allegation that I think is really the one that I think has a lot of merit, is after you had that initial fire, why didn't you shut off power then?
Right.
And so there was some sort of discretionary decision that was made in there that I think if the decision was made by government, then I think you'd be talking about some sort of statutory or sovereign immunity.
No question.
But this was by a private company or series of private companies, the electric company, that they don't have the benefit of that kind of protection. And, when you think about shutting off power when everything's going fine, maybe you got some wind, shutting off power, you've got dialysis centers, you've got hospitals, you've got and
fire stations, pick one.
Fire stations, and here you've got pumping stations as well, water pumping stations to get water into the hydrants and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to think about as far as shutting off all power. But on the other hand, if you don't, you've got a big problem as well. And so you can see there's a judgment that someone, I'm sure in the electric company, had to make. And one of the allegations is that, they dropped the ball on it. So there's allegations. Let me just get my notes here on this. Let me get it over here. I'll just see me looking over here. The suit alleges negligence, which is, failure to meet the standard of care, which leads to damages. Gross negligence, which would be a gross deviation from the standard of care. Private nuisance, which I'm not really seeing that. Another one, inverse condemnation. I'm not really seeing that. Okay. The one I want to spend a little bit of time with, Brad, is strict liability for ultra hazardous activities. Now, ultra hazardous activities is it's an unusual type of liability in our legal system anyway. Now, other countries have strict liability for different things, but in the United States, we generally have a fault-based liability system. So that means that in order for anyone to be liable, you must have done something wrong in order to be liable. Strict liability makes you liable even if you did nothing wrong. Okay. And it's very, very limited situations in the United States where you have strict liability. Very, very limited. It's got to be something like if you have an unusually or unreasonably dangerous animal. Okay. Like if you keep a lion. Okay. If you live in Manlius and you have a lion in your backyard or, in a cage in your basement or whatever it may be, that's an unreasonably dangerous animal. Okay. If you deal with explosives.
I was going to just say blasting and dynamites are.
And those are that's the classic one. I've got a friend that, he does blasting, and his insurance is like, it's like $20,000 a year just to get the insurance. And then there's a per explosion, rider on top of that. It's very, very expensive. Okay. But if you do blasting, you are strictly liable for any harm that happens. Even if you meet the standard of care, even if you exceed the standard of care, if any harm happens, you're strictly liable. So the allegation here is that providing electricity is an ultra hazardous activity.
And no way.
Yeah. And you're shaking. And I'm saying the same thing. I'm not. Is it dangerous? Absolutely. Okay. Is a dog dangerous? Could a dog bite somebody? Yes. But a dog is not like a lion. Okay.
Well, then there's the duty of what can you afford to charge people to upgrade your systems, right? I mean, so one of the things they said in here was it should have been underground. Okay, well, putting lines underground is incredibly expensive, incredibly expensive. I'm sure they'd love to have their lines underground, right? Because hurricanes wouldn't matter. Like in Florida, everything's underground. But
you have an earthquake.
yeah, well, true, right? And then you got to dig it all up. But nonetheless, you know, there's financial limitations. My bet is you will see within a year less a court order dismissing this. However, my question is venue. I'm thinking they're going to try to, the defense is going to try to move venue off the island. To me, first of all, Lord knows what the court system's doing, if anything.
It's in Oahu. The federal district court's in Oahu. So it's not on Maui.
Right. Where our friend Shane Fuente is for who works for the fire department there. But I'm curious. It probably Oahu would be okay. I guess I'm curious how pissed off people are going to be, whether you can get a fair judge. But look, in fairness, most of this is going to get dismissed fairly soon.
Well,
I think they'll leave negligence claim.
I got to tell you, it's kind of like when I was a young attorney, I was following a line of cases out of Florida that had to do with crash worthiness of vehicles, and there was a group primarily out of Florida that were they'd be suing the auto manufacturers, and they'd lose, and they'd sue and they'd lose over crash worthiness, and eventually they gained the knowledge of the industry to the point where now they started to win, which in turn is why we now have airbags and everything else, because once they started winning, the
became more expensive not to fix it.
Here's what happened. The auto manufacturers ran to Congress, says, we're going to go out of business. We're going to go out of business. You got to do something. Okay, we're going to come up with federal standards. As long as you meet the federal standards, you can't be sued for crash worthiness and all that stuff. So bottom line is those attorneys were successful in overcoming, which, you know, if you're driving in a Ford Mustang and somebody, you know, driver gets killed, you're going to sue Ford. Even though the driver drove the car, it's not really Ford's, but, you know, arguably if the car was manufactured a little better, he would have been able to survive the crash. You think about it, back in the 70s and 80s, that was probably kind of a stretch, but eventually they go, good. Why am I bothering you with this? Okay. We're seeing the exact same thing happen in California, holding the electric companies liable for the wildland fires that their down power lines have happening. And they put Pacific Gas and Electric into bankruptcy. The attorneys were able, and I don't know about this particular firm, but I suspect because of this, the way that this complaint is very well done, that they may be able, probably not on gross negligence, probably not on ultra hazardous activity, but on negligence.
Right. Negligence is what's got to survive as a question.
I'm thinking that this case has some legs against the electric company, and if it is indeed $5 billion, and is probably even more, that those companies may end up being forced into Chapter 11, probably. I'm assuming, but into bankruptcy. I think on the negligence side, because again, maybe you could say that the complaint says they should have shut off power earlier, and you shouldn't have had any of the fires. Okay, so all right, maybe not. Okay, but once you had that initial fire and you had wires down, you had poles going,
was that enough to create a duty, or to,
you know what, right? I'm saying, that you should have stopped the power, and then you have all that other stuff that I think you were referencing, the fact that there exists technology that the electric company in public documents had acknowledged that they wanted to get, and they couldn't get the funding. They couldn't, organize the whole process there. And so how it's going to wash out, I don't know. There may be some ugly things. I recall one of the key cases in California involved Pacific Gas and Electric, who, by the way, they reached out to me. They didn't like the kind of stuff that I was saying. And yeah, I know.
Reiterate the allegations.
Their PIO reached out to press, whatever, and
Wow.
you know, so
look how important you are.
They're out of a job now. They went bankrupt. Okay, they weren't paying attention. But one of the interesting things, there was a line item in one of their budgets. It was like a $10 million line item in their budget for tree trimming. Okay. And in a given year, they didn't use it. Okay. And that qualified the executives, the president, vice president, and all the high mucky mucks, that qualified them for a bonus. So, because if they had spent that 10 million, then they wouldn't have had the profit line that would have qualified them to get their bonus. So they basically chose not to do the tree trimming. And then that led to, you know, the lawsuits were alleging that decision there was a selfish one, not to spend the money on tree trimming so that they could get their bonus. And, you know, when you start getting into that, there's no way that the attorneys who filed this complaint right now know about that stuff, but through the discovery process, they will find out.
That secret engineering memo of, if we don't fix this now, the whole island's going to burn. And that's what they hope for.
And it's going to get ugly. You know, it's really going to get ugly. And mass tort cases are going to, you know, this is going to turn into a mass tort case. And there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of additional plaintiffs. There'll probably be additional defendants.
Oh, the insurance companies are going to come in on this. There's so little question.
Yeah. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So this will be an interesting one to watch. Unfortunately, and I feel terrible. I wish there was something that, you know, makes you kind of want to get on a plane and go out and offer to help the folks out there. But I think then you just become a burden to the system as well. So I think, you know, we all kind of feel awful. And, you know, I've got some friends in the Maui Fire Department, and, you know, I haven't heard from them, but I hope they're doing okay. I know many of them lost their homes.
Oh yeah, they're losing their homes, and some their families. I heard one, I think, firefighter family, or direct or indirect, but you know, that people are out fighting the fire, protecting everybody else, right? That's what we do as firefighters. We're out protecting someone, but you know, our own families at home without our protection, and that's the sacrifice we make. But it's very tough.